Guyana, the only English-speaking country in South America, but we are identified with the Caribbean. The headquarters of the Caribbean community is in Georgetown, Guyana. Guyana is in a deep constitutional crisis because recently a member of the current government voted with the opposition on a no confidence motion. Elections is supposed, according to the Constitution, to be held in 3 months. Will we have an election in Guyana or not? Stay tuned. Carbonation is up next. Guyana is governed by a coalition government, the People's National Congress and the AFC. They were elected a few years ago in 2015, but the opposition, People's Progressive Party, tabled a motion in Parliament of no confidence against the government. And surprisingly to the government is that one of their members voted with the opposition. According to the Constitution, we are supposed to have elections within 3 months. But it seems, from all the information coming from the Elections Commission, that we may not have that election in 3 months. Today in our studio, we have two Guyanese who will discuss this constitutional crisis. Gentlemen, welcome to Carbonation.
Welcome.
We have with us Floyd Haynes, who is president of Haynes Incorporated and the president of Roraima Institute, and also a professor at UDC in business and finance. He studied at Harvard, he studied in Oxford. And we also have with us Mr. Dennis Wiggins, a businessman, a CPA, and also he studied at the University of Guyana and Howard University, and has been very active in the community over the years, the Guyanese diaspora. Gentlemen, welcome to the program. Do we have a constitutional crisis in Guyana based on the no confidence votes? Can you tell us what that is all about?
The no confidence motion came about because a member of the sitting government, the coalition government, chose to exercise his franchise, and he voted against his own side, the government. That resulted in a vote against the government. The Constitution is pretty clear. Whenever there is a no confidence motion and the government loses, my understanding is cabinet should resign, but the government should continue in office until the next election, which should be scheduled 90 days later. I don't think we're at a point where there's a constitutional crisis. I think following the vote, the coalition government decided that they will challenge it using the powers of the court and all the other powers that are available to them, which they're allowed to do. This challenge is going on as we speak. At some point, the constitutional date for the next election will come, sometime around March 19th, I hear, or March 21st, or something thereabout. At that point, if nothing has been resolved, then we would be in a constitutional crisis.
Well, we should clarify that first, the government was surprised that one of their members voted with the opposition. Number two, they went back to Parliament and asked the Speaker to overrule the first ruling that there was a no confidence. And he said, no, take it to the court. Right. It went to the court, and a judge ruled that it was valid, the no confidence motion. Now, what was the basis of the no confidence motion? Now, Dennis, you are part of the Guyanese diaspora. There are over 400,000 Guyanese abroad, and we have been contributing to Guyana over the years. Now, the argument of the government is that the member of parliament of the ruling party that voted with the opposition holds dual citizenship, Canadian and a Guyanese, and therefore he has sworn loyalty to another country. What is your position on that outside of what the ruling of the court is?
Well, let's establish first that the Constitution is clear about dual citizenship. You cannot be in Parliament while holding allegiance to another country. And I think that was that was made clear by the CJ
Judge.
ruling. However, I believe that that article needs to be repealed. The reason being, Guyana is a very small country, as you know, with a high migration rate. Most of the knowledgeable, the people in the country migrate to different parts of the world. So there's a depletion of skills in the society. As a result of that, I believe the government should allow members of the diaspora to serve so that they can lend these skills to the society. So it is my opinion that that article needs to be repealed. But as it exists now, it is unconstitutional for a member of parliament to hold dual citizenship. The Constitution is very clear about that.
Floyd, does the government really have moral authority on this issue, considering that some of their own ministers in the ruling party hold dual citizenship and other members in the opposition also hold dual citizenship?
No, I don't think so. I think the argument is laughable at best. Simply because you have, as you said, members on both sides that hold dual citizenship. The idea of dual citizenship, I agree with Dennis. The Constitution is clear, but we've ignored the Constitution in the sense that dual citizens have passed legislation after legislation, budget after budget. And so if we're going to stand now, we can only look forward, and perhaps we ought to change it going forward. But to look back and try to change it retroactively seems like, to me, a non-starter. Now, I disagree with Dennis. I don't think dual citizens should be allowed to serve in Parliament. I think you should pledge loyalty to the country if you want to serve in Parliament. That should not preclude us, however, from engaging the diaspora. He is absolutely right. The stakes are too high, the country is too small. We need to engage the diaspora.
So you're saying if you're elected to the Parliament of Guyana or run for president, you cannot have dual citizenship?
That's correct.
That's your position?
That's my position.
But you're saying you don't need to be a member of Parliament or the president of Guyana to contribute?
No,
as
absolutely.
we have been doing, like the vast majority.
Yeah, so let me give you a very quick example. So recently, the just recently concluded World Cup soccer. So I use soccer analogy because I'm a former soccer player. But in the recently concluded World Cup, you saw teams like Brazil, Argentina that took the field. And the 11 players that took the field for Argentina included Messi and those types of players that live in Europe and play in Europe. But because the stakes were so high, the World Cup is as good as it gets. Argentina felt it necessary to bring their talent from abroad back to be part of the Argentinian team. Same thing with Brazil. Now, if we could do that with sports, we should be able to do the same type of things when it involves bringing back talent to help build and develop the country.
Now, last year, I attended a conference, some of us did, at the University of Guyana on the question of the diaspora and the role. I presented a paper that has been published in a book that has just been published by the University of Guyana. And I want to read just a sentence of the contribution that Guyanese abroad have been making. Remittances represent more than foreign direct investment and nearly as much as current official development assistance from all donor parties. They also represent about 60% of trade with the United States. How can you have that reality? And this was done by a study by Inter-American Dialogue by Orozco in 2003, which has not really changed a lot. Shouldn't there be a more intelligent message communicated to the diaspora? Because currently the diaspora is very unhappy with this issue of them becoming a major issue in a no confidence vote. It seems like they have been a victim of this issue, the way the Attorney General took it to the court, like it's picking on the diaspora.
I think, the diaspora has tremendous contribution to make to Guyana. And, it's not a novel idea that the diaspora contribution is important to development societies. Many developing societies use the diaspora to help them develop. I mean, we've been talking, and I had this discussion with Floyd a little before the program, that the government should institute a skill bank, whereas they can take skills from the diaspora, register people with certain skills who can make certain contributions. In the diaspora, we have engineers, scientists, doctors, all these people with skills that do not exist in Guyana. And so if you register these people as they go to visit Guyana, and you put it in a database so that if a project comes up and you need that particular skill, then you could go to your database and invite that person, an engineer. You have a road project and you need consultation from an engineer, you could call X to consult rather than
I would like to make a point here. The managing director of the International Monetary Fund, for the first time, has said that developing countries must use more consultants from their own country, people who are born in their own country.
But Paul, let me make this point. Listen, the diaspora is a reservoir of talent for a developing country. It constitutes a large talent pool as it relates to Guyana specifically. How can you hope to win a game when you're taking the field with half of your talent pool or a quarter of your talent pool? It just doesn't make sense. You have to be able to take that field with all of your talent pool. That includes your talent at home and your talent in the diaspora. The stakes are too high. The talent pool in country is too small. You've got to broaden that pool. And the surest way to do that is to embrace the diaspora, as I see it.
Okay, well, I want to move to another issue that is very linked to this. Up to recently, they have discovered, Exxon has discovered more oil in Guyana. Floyd, can you tell us a bit about the new discovery and what is the state of all this discovery of oil in Guyana in terms of, like, we were told that next year the Guyana government will begin to earn an income from the oil industry, and it will begin to be a major industry in Guyana. What is the state of the find and how is it working in Guyana?
Well, I haven't followed the most recent find, but as an observer over the last year or so, there has been find after find after find. The last number I saw was that we had 5 billion.
We are now over
barrels.
over the 5 billion.
Proven reserves,
Yeah.
which makes us one of the largest country with oil reserves, or the most recent find for Exxon in the last 10 or 20 or so years. For a country like Guyana that has less than 1 million people, it's a profound development. And that is just a fraction of the potential of the country. There are other blocks that have not yet been fully explored. There are other blocks that may not have been auctioned off. And so if you extrapolate just based on where we are, I mean, the potential for the wealth of that country is just unbelievable. And so the real question becomes, how does the country position itself to manage that wealth? To me, that is the real question.
Yep.
Because there's no doubt there's going to be monies coming into that country. The question is, what do we do with it?
Well, I would like to link it to what's happening with what I call the constitutional crisis and whether or not we will have election and a free and fair election. Guyana is a country polarized between two major ethnic groups, one being represented in one party majority-wise and the other one in another party. Now, previously, we have had fraudulent elections, a fight for power, and to fight for the scarce resources in the country by the elites. Now that we will have all this oil, will that be an incentive that even if we have an election, that it would not be free and fair because the current government will not want to give up power with all that oil income coming in and to hand it over to the leadership of the opposition, which is another ethnic group. And I'm speaking real politics here in Guyana and real reality here. What is your view on this? Because you have been keeping in touch with this ethnic issue over the years. You have written letters to the newspapers. What do you advise the Guyanese at home how they should deal with this matter?
Well, you know, I've always said elections in Guyana is a racial referendum because at the end of the day, the two main racial groups, Indians and Africans in Guyana, will bat down and vote for the party that they've historically voted for, the Indians, PPP, and the Africans, PNC. And so I believe oil, as it's right now, is a major influencing factor in how people see elections and the grab for power. So no doubt you'll have people in government who will believe that they should not give up power because they can probably better manage the oil resources.
And benefit too.
And benefit from it. However, as it relates to elections, I think if you have proper observers in the election observers and certain rules in place, you can have free and fair elections. I don't necessarily subscribe to the notion that elections will be rigged in the society. And that claim will no doubt be made, whether the PP win or loses, and vice versa. Every elections result in claims of rigging. But at the end of the day, observers certify
International observers.
Like
the OAS, Carter Center, Commonwealth Secretariat.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
And as a result of that, I believe elections can be free and fair. But you'll have those claims nonetheless.
So Floyd, what's your take on this?
Let me go back to the Constitution. I think the Constitution, all can agree, is terribly flawed. And it sets up a formula for disaster, and let me sort of explain this. So the way I understand the Guyana Constitution, it allows a minority government to take office. And what I mean by that, so let's assume there's 100 votes. I get 40, you get 30, you get 30. I can form the government with what is called a plurality. My 40%. It's not a simple
but
majority.
But you don't have majority in
But I don't have majority.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that works in homogenous countries. But when you have a country like Guyana where major parties are organized along race lines, essentially each party represents a race. So if party A or party B wins with its 40%, it gets to form the government. And essentially you're giving the keys to the kingdom or the keys to the vault to somebody who has won 40% of the vote. It seems patently ridiculous to me. And so in a situation like Guyana, you have to have checks and balances that would prevent any single race or a group or a party from binding the country in serious things. I mean, the oil find and the recent contract with the oil, no single group should be allowed to take that country into a contract without checks and balances. The other thing that comes up with the minority government is that there's always going to be recall back and forth, as we saw in 2011. And so the people's business is constantly being interrupted. It's a tragically flawed.
This is the second time with no confidence.
Yes.
The fourth time was a threat of no confidence vote,
Yeah.
and the government dissolved. Yeah. Now there was a real no confidence vote,
yeah.
and the government doesn't want to dissolve.
Yeah. But you should not be, the bottom line is you should not be allowed to form the government with less than a simple majority. Because again, you're giving one party, one race, one group the keys to the vault. And it just seems like to me that it's just patently unfair.
It seems to me from what I've been reading also, the analysis, like Floyd and I are with the Roraima Institute, and we just contracted somebody who has provided us with over 450 articles that have been written about oil in Guyana, from academics to the government to the oil companies. And when you review that situation of the oil and what's happening with the oil, one of the main arguments is that we are not been representing our interests properly, and there's a division in the society. Do you believe that if the political parties that represent the two major ethnic groups were to work together and have a common policy vis-a-vis the oil industry, that Guyanese will benefit more than if they were divided and they were just relying totally on the external white world to determine what is in the contract and this and that and the other? What is your take?
Yeah, no doubt. And, you know, a few years ago, some of us, including Floyd, have argued for a shared governance formula, where the two major political parties come together and create shared governance. And with that, you'll have resources from both ethnic groups being represented, skills from both ethnic groups. So if they go to the table together, they can pull from a larger source of skills and and represent the country.
And the nationalist interest.
And not in the nationalist interest, exactly. But now what you have, when the APNU govern, the major party in is the PNC, the resources are pulled mainly from blacks, African Guyanese. And when the PP govern, most of the resources are pulled from Indian. And with a depleted human resource scale based in Guyana, you're further depleting the skills. So the national interest is not being represented. What is being represented is an ethnic interest, rather.
And an ethnic elite interest.
Exactly.
Because the vast majority of Guyanese are under the poverty line and extremely poor.
Yes, yes.
Whether you're an African community, Tiger Bay, or Boys Town, Linden, or whether you're on the plantation, particularly now that the sugar workers have been thrown on the streets and they don't have work and they're hungry. So we do have a serious problem of polarization between rich and poor, the elite and the masses, and we have a situation with the Indian and African. And you know, so Floyd, how do you believe there's any chance in this short term of this whole idea you guys have been supporting in diaspora of a national front government, a shared governance?
No, I'm not hopeful at all. Okay. It's something we've been talking about, but the more I think about it, it's not going to happen because human beings being who they are, human nature is fixed and it's flawed. And people are ultimately going to seek their own self-interest. And so you have to have legislation. You have to, that can be enforced by an independent judiciary. But you've got to have systems of checks and balances that can force side A to work with side B. And so let me give you a simple example. In order to commit the country in something major, you can have something that requires a 2/3 majority vote, which means whoever is in power will be forced to collaborate
to lobby the
and
other
work
side.
with the other side. Those are the kinds of things. They aren't things you would see in a normal democracy, but we are far from normal. And so we've got to come up with ways that are suitable to our type of situation, given our reality.
Yeah. Well, you see, so what you guys are really talking about is, it seems to me we cannot move forward to address the wealth of the country. You know, we produce a lot of gold. It's a #1 earner. We produce bauxite. We have a forest industry, a lot of timber. We now have oil. We had sugar, we have rice. But our people are migrating in large numbers to New York and to Toronto and so forth. But it seems to me that our fundamental problem since political independence is a governance problem. And a governance cannot occur without rules, a constitution. And the constitution we have in Guyana had a bad beginning in 1979-80. There was a referendum for the House and the Mouse. And it entrenched an executive president, party paramountcy, presidential paramountcy, created a presidency that was an imperial presidency in a country that is like a village. It was ridiculous. And that is what is happening now. So why is it in the diaspora there is not a clamor for a brand new constitution? Repeal and replace.
This coalition government actually campaigned on constitutional reform. They promised.
That is true.
That when they ascended to power, that there'll be constitutional reform.
That is true.
We're still waiting for that constitution.
It never happened.
Reform. And so I believe.
Why?
No, the reason why is that once you're governing, you're comfortable with the existing constitution, because the existing constitution is pro whatever government in power. It gives tremendous power to the president and to the government. So they're comfortable with it. But when you're in opposition, then it is bad for you. So you recognize that when you're in opposition, but once you get in there, you benefit from it. But there have been constitutional reform in the past. Remember 1999, there was, I think, 171 amendment to the Constitution that was given to Parliament and was also accepted. So you had some constitutional reform. One of it, right now, impact this no confidence motion. And it has been raised in certain circles whether Sharon Das should have voted against his government.
So you believe we should continue with the process of reforming?
Yeah, definitely.
Floyd, what's your take on it? You see, you want to repeal and replace, or you want reforming, a continuous program of reform for the Constitution?
Repeal and replace. It's a tragically flawed document. It benefits the person in power. And that is why when you're in power, as Dennis said, you don't want to tamper with it because it works for you. But at some point, we're going to have to rise above that sort of pettiness and be magnanimous. And I continue to believe that there is such an angel in our nature. And at some point, someone will assume the office of presidency and will be magnanimous enough to say, leadership. I will change.
So it's leadership.
It's leadership.
Leadership, leadership, leadership. If we can only have a Mandela kind of leadership, right?
Exactly.
That's a dream of everybody. One last quick point of a very quick opinion. How do we overcome in the coming elections that if blacks vote for the PPP, they're not called traitors? And if Indians vote for the PNC or decide publicly to support the PNC, they're not called traitors to their race? One quick answer.
I think you need a social cohesion program. This coalition government promised, in fact, President Granger, when he campaigned on social cohesion in that an inclusive type of governance. But unfortunately, that didn't happen. I think any party that is in power need to promote social cohesion and take the message directly to the people.
Floyd?
No easy answer. Vote your conscience. Look at who has delivered for you and vote for those people. And if neither has delivered for you, perhaps you stay home.
Gentlemen, thank you very much for being on this program. We are going to monitor, follow up what's happening in Guyana to see if when there will be an election, will it be free and fair, and will there be a peaceful transition if the opposition wins or loses the current government. Whichever way, we need peaceful transition. We are hoping that the leadership in Guyana, because this comes down to leadership, that they will be mature, patriotic, and be committed to democracy and to uniting their people and the country, so that being on the brink of getting all this oil wealth, that they'll be able to access it as one people, one nation with one destiny in order to develop the country of Guyana and transform the poor people of Guyana into a lifestyle and a way of life that they can have ladders to the middle class and have a wonderful, viable, and happy country. Until next time, I'm Paul New, Tennessee, for Carib Nation.